Hey, Chelsea.
Hey, how are you guys?
So
great.
how expected was it from your point of view that they would dismiss both Davey and Rizzo?
I'll be honest, I was blown away. I was not blown away because I thought, Rizzo and Davey should keep their jobs forever. I was blown away because it was so decisive. It's just not the kind of thing we've seen the learners do ever. So to kind of have that come down the way it did and, require them to presumably put in the effort of finding new people for those roles and paying them, it's stunning to me. So, yeah, I was blown away.
Well, is there any indication that it was a deal where they kind of insisted that Mike fired Davey and he was like, no, I'm not going to do it? So then they do both? Any indication that that was the case?
No indication of that yet. I think the Rizzo part of the move is still a little bit of a mystery. I think we'll kind of slowly figure it out, what the decision-making was there. Obviously, it's very hard to know what the learners are thinking at any time. So, still kind of trying to get there. But, I think there's a logic to it just in the fact that if they had decided that Rizzo was not going to be the guy next year, they didn't want to pick up the option. I think it is justifiable to decide to let somebody else make a huge pick like they have next week. So, that also could have played into it.
Yeah, and it did become apparent, at least to me anyway, I think probably to a lot of people, that they kind of did become tied to the hip, right? Davey and Mike. And Mike had pointed out here that he had hired managers and fired guys that he really liked. But there just did become a point there where Davey and Mike kind of seemed their fates were kind of be sealed together with these, these sort of every other year contract, I thought it was kind of embarrassing. These little, Mike Rizzo has to go in every other year and beg for a contract. But that's kind of the way they ran the operation. And it did seem like they were kind of tied together.
I think so. I think if only because it never seemed, at least in the last few years, that firing one would change the direction of the organization. I think there was definitely a justification to let Davey go just with the way they've been playing this year. I think they've looked sloppy. I think there's not been a lot of urgency evident there. And, that may or may not be related to Davey, but I do think maybe a new voice for some of these young guys who've never had one made a lot of sense. But, on the Rizzo front, it just seemed like a new voice in the clubhouse wasn't going to fix what they really needed, which is probably kind of a recalibration of the entire organization. So, I think in that way they kind of were tied at the hip because it was pretty hard to justify, at least for me, at least for us sitting out here, in our logical way of thinking, it seemed hard to justify doing just one and saying, oh, that'll fix it. But the thing that always made it seem possible is that the learners have not operated with the logic that we would expect at times. So I think that's why this is so surprising, is because it kind of makes sense in a way.
Right.
Chelsea,
it kind of does.
You just used the term the learners, and when we talk about ownership, that's the term we always throw out, the learners. Now, Mark Lerner is the chairman or whatever his title is, but fill me in a little bit more because I don't have a great picture of, who's in the office? Are they running day-to-day operations? It seems quite nebulous.
It is. And, we've been kind of trying to nail that down a little bit too. My colleagues, Darius Faluga, who you obviously know, and Andrew Golden and Spencer Nussbaum, we've been kind of talking to people about this. And what it seems like, it's kind of what we knew, right? Mark Lerner is nominally the chairperson of this. Alan Gottlieb is another in-law of the family, and he kind of does the people interactions in the room, when it comes to, for instance, telling, Riz and Davey that they were gone. Ed Cohen is another longtime member of this group. He's been around forever. He attends the owners' meetings for them right now. He's kind of the guy that says yes or no on, the big decisions. And then there's, kind of a few others that are around the periphery, and they all have to agree, and often they don't. And that's why you see this stasis that the Nats have been in. So for that group to kind of come to this conclusion, I think probably took a long time. But exactly who looked at this and said, we've got to make a change is still not clear, but I will say it wouldn't have happened if they hadn't all agreed, and that is something we haven't seen them do, even on things as simple as the jersey patch until lately. So clearly there was some, I don't know if it was embarrassment over kind of the press they've been getting or what it is, but there was clearly some consensus in the room that something needed to change, which, at least means they've been paying attention.